Welcome to Making Sense of the Madness. We've got a great show lined up for you today. We've got Millie Weaver, not just to discuss the incoming administration, election integrity, but really what went down in 2020 and why it still matters. You're not going to want to miss it. Buckle up and get ready to make sense of the madness. And we are back. We are joined by Millie Weaver. You can check her out over at millennialmillie.com. Thank you so much for being here. Now, before we even get into the election stuff, January 6th, the incoming administration, how did you get into this arena and then really make your way up into a position where you were out in D.C. Speaking on the election in 2020 at the December Stop the Steal rallies? Of course, we know what happens on January 6th. And really, that was just the beginning of an even more accelerated career to the point now where many people are calling for retribution. I'm not so sure that's actually going to happen, but I don't think that we can have a true reformation of the system unless all of the lies are exposed and we get some kind of accountability. So go ahead.
So I started out kind of as a journalist really in the 2016 time period. I went around covering the Hillary Clinton speaking events and the Donald Trump rallies and showing that the media wasn't telling the truth. So that kind of got me into journalism, so to speak. And shortly thereafter, started working for InfoWars. And as a journalist, I became very interested in conducting investigations and doing more investigative journalism. And so I became very fascinated after covering the protests where you'd see these Antifa leftist groups showing up, protesting with their media ops and their photographers, and everything looked like a big giant circus event or some kind of a pre-put on, performance, so to speak. I saw that at Charlottesville during the Charlottesville riot that occurred, how everything looked very staged. It almost reminded me of like a Renaissance fair-esque atmosphere. The police intentionally stood down. I'm like, it really led me to start questioning what is behind this like massive leftist protest apparatus. Like we hear people talking and questioning, is George Soros paying them? Who's paying these people? What is going on? So that's really what led me to really go down that avenue of wanting to investigate and find out more about these leftist groups. So it was probably around actually late 2017, early 2018 that I really set out. I had a team and I set out to infiltrate the leftist groups. I became very fascinated with Bernie Sanders. He looked like he was starting to pick up some momentum. And so I was wondering if he was going to be a challenger. So that's kind of what led me down into the Sunrise Movement. The Sunrise Movement is a youth-led climate organization from the outward appearance, and it is heavily backed by Bernie Sanders, as well as it's mutually endorsing Bernie Sanders, and Bernie is working with them, as well as they back AOC, Rashida Tlaib. A bunch of these really progressive communist leftists are backed by this group. So that's where I decided, let's get started here. And I had a team, and we were essentially going in and infiltrating these groups. And so initially, it took a lot of patience and a lot of understanding and time and knowledge into these groups. But eventually, around the 2020 time period, is when we really started to get gold, right? Like we were getting all these like pre-planning groups where they were working in a giant spokes council, where you think that like BLM, Shut Down DC, Sunrise Movement, Refuse Fascism, all these like leftist organizations, Antifa groups, and protest groups, you think that they're these like separate entities that don't really necessarily work together or organize together, when it's actually not. That's not the case. They are very much horizontally aligned, and they form what are called spokes councils. And on the spokes council, you have a representative from each of these leftist groups, and they will agree upon their actions that they're going to take. And they will pre-plan the entire thing out down to every detail. down to, okay, this group's going to be violent ones getting into it with the police, and they've been trained to violently engage the police. Whereas here are our kumbaya peaceful protesters that we're going to use for media ops to then, oh, here are our leftist videographers, camera people that we use that are our allies in media, and we use them to build movement by getting them to take photographs that it makes it look like the police are beating up the kumbaya peaceful protesters, right? So they have a whole mechanism going on here with these groups, and that's really quickly what I realized. So started to see that they were plotting to kick in Lindsey Graham's door, plotting to kick in Tucker Carlson's door in a campaign called the Wide Awake campaign in 2020. Was able to get that information to the police. They were able to prevent that and have police out there in time beforehand. Actually, videotaped, had one of my teammates go in and actually go in person and videotape them pre-planning to kick the doors in, which was actually, you know, a little bit comical watching these Antifa crazies trying to, you know, kick the air. But eventually it started to get very serious because leading up to the 2020 election, these groups started to actually become part of a massive coalition that was called the Protect the Results Coalition. And the Protect the Results Coalition consisted of hundreds of political action groups and nonprofits that had their political action group arms, if that makes sense, as well as a group that called themselves Feds for Democracy. Feds for Democracy was a group of thousands of federal government bureaucrats and members of our own government, including members that hold top secret security clearances, members on National Security Council, White House admin, staffers for congressional members. Okay, so you start to, you know, really quickly, I start to realize that this is a bigger conspiracy. This isn't just, oh, you have leftist groups that pre-plan and stage these protesting actions for their own political agenda. No, it's those groups actually work with members within our own government, and those members within our own government are incredibly communist, Marxist leaning, very radical in their political ideologies. And one thing that they were all really, you know, I guess you could say their agenda, their MO was very much to get rid of Trump by any means. They wanted to force him out. They referred to him as an authoritarian, a dictator. And what they were doing is, we saw these members of, you know, State Department, USAID, trained professionals that were trained by our own intelligence agencies to go into foreign countries to overthrow dictatorships in foreign countries. Those people had now turned their sights on the American people and on our president, and they were training these radical leftist groups as well as union members. The unions were heavily involved in this. They were training these groups of radicalists on how to overthrow the president of the United States, how to overthrow a quote unquote dictator, how to do a coup, an uprising. And the whole, I guess, premise of Protect the Results was so that, you know, they wanted to make sure that, you know, because they had predicted eerily that there was going to be a massive flood of mail-in ballots, and it was going to appear as though Trump won on election night, but in the subsequent days or weeks, it was going to shift to Joe Biden, and Joe Biden was going to be the winner.
And Millie, just to break down that point,
if Trump contested.
Yeah, that was literally broadcast on Axios with this, you know, smug dude talking about sliders and how it was going to appear as a red mirage the night of the elections. But when all was said and done, Joe Biden was going to win the elections. Now, you went over a lot of things there. One of the things I want to focus on before we go any further is you talked about how so much of this felt manufactured. The common person doesn't understand how a non-government organization can successfully mobilize these movements. You know, you talk about all these people showing up to protests, and really, my generation hadn't seen organic protests since before the Iraq War. You know, that was really the last time I saw people get out in mass. It was genuine. They just didn't want to go into Iraq. You know, I covered, I think, the G20 back in 2009. You kind of had your relative things. You had your old school Antifa back then in the Black Bloc. And I've never been for people hiding their face, but they were always a minority. All of a sudden, post 2016, this idea of covering your face, of wearing all black, became trendy, right? It kind of went away from everybody that was wearing like a Che Guevara shirt and not really serious about it to all of a sudden taking that action. So how do these organizations, you talked about some of the training, but how do they mobilize things financially? Because another thing that wasn't really part of my generation was busing people in. We've seen this phenomenon not only at protests, but during elections for candidates at this point as well. You used to have organic support for or against an agenda or for or against a candidate. But as you alluded to before, things really do seem more manufactured than ever. How does that take place?
Okay, so each various affinity group or organization might have a slightly differing model. However, by getting in and really being able to access the internal docs of the Sunrise Movement and analyzing that, I was able to realize like what they use in the Sunrise Movement was a hub consistency model. So what they would do is they would have these groups, affinity groups, okay, or hubs, and those they would form pockets of maybe, depending on how big it is, it could start as small as like 8 people, but it could go up to like maybe 20, 30, 50 people, right? And those hubs of people actually, they work very closely with the organization as a whole, and they compete for money. They compete for grants and for contracts. So judging on the high risk activities they're doing, judging on the people and how they've performed other actions or protest actions in the past successfully, they actually get more grant money. So they actually kind of trickle the money down in that way. It's very fascinating to look through their documents. But not only that, but you see that they'll have like an NGO, like a nonprofit 501c3, and they'll funnel the money in through there. And then I would think it looks pretty suspicious. You'd have to have somebody who really can audit and understand. But to me, it looks as though they're funneling the money into the political action groups, the PACs that they have, and then the PACs kind of funneling it into their activists there. But even above that, that's just one organization, like the Sunrise Movement. There's many of these organizations, and many of them are getting money through like Act Blue. When I traced some of the money back, it went to Arabella. It went to some of these really big, dark money Democrat slush funds that they seem to trickle money down through. Another thing that was pretty fascinating, and if you guys wanted to look into my full report on millennialmillie.com, The Enemies from Within, that article there, I go deep into tracing that members inside the Zoom calls were very much closely connected with a group called Community Change. And when you looked into Community Change and the building that it was registered out of, that Time magazine article that talked about the secret shadow campaign in 2020 to stop the steal, this is the crazy thing that blows my mind here is I just think, this was the secret shadow campaign to steal the election.
Wasn't it, they refer to it as fortifying the election, and in that article basically admitted that these forces just went to the line of what was legal. They just walked right up to that line. Look, that article is extremely telling. I think it's by William Arkin. He's also the only guy that's brought up signature reduction. One of the few, again, obviously the piece could have gone deeper, but it really did let you know that there was a quote unquote conspiracy, folks. People got together behind the scenes, weren't honest with the rest of us, and conspired to take this guy out. Now, I would argue, no matter what, all of this conspiring can't be successful without the COVID-19 84 nightmare and kind of the mechanisms that surrounded it. I think that is very apparent now that we have the election results in 2024. And because of that, you had super, I would say, even more bizarre situations in the protests on the run-up. Now, when we talk about the Stop the Steal stuff in December, there were a couple of them, but I was there at the second one. Actually, I remember watching you speak and actually talking to you after the fact. That had heavy security. I mean, that was night and day from what happens on January 6th. You know, I remember later in that evening, it was very difficult to get back to my hotel. Entire streets were cordoned off. When there was a confrontation between the Proud Boys and Antifa, they weren't allowed to even get near each other. You know, they were a full street block away with cops on both sides. So, you know, we got to take a break. But when we come back, I want to talk about that time period. You saw it firsthand. When we talk about challenging the election and then the on-ground ops that take place that kind of disturb that ability to question the election in a meaningful manner. And then the narrative, of course, that if you dared to do, you're an election denier, you're now an insurrectionist after the fact. I want to get your take on that and more. You can check her out at millennialmillie.com. More Making Sense of the Madness after this.
Hey folks, it's your buddy John Rich here and co-founder of Old Glory Bank. Let me ask you a question. Why would you trust your banking with people that hate you? Well, you shouldn't. We're building a freedom economy, and now we have a pro-America bank. It's called Old Glory Bank. Check it out at oldglorybank.com and open yourself an account today.
Old Glory Bank is a full-service, FDIC-insured online bank with business and consumer banking and customers in all 50 states. It takes just 8 minutes to open an account at oldglorybank.com.
I couldn't give anything a higher endorsement.
I would be remiss had I not include Cardio Miracle on my very short list of secrets.
It's the real deal. It's a real product. It's not another supplement.
I'm operating about 6 to 8 hours, and I've noticed that being on this Cardio Miracle has made a huge difference.
Since I started taking Cardio Miracle about 8 months into it, the benefits have been fantastic.
You know, if I get hungry, then I just have a Cardio Miracle.
Not only is it safe, but it's necessary to take Cardio Miracle to stay well.
This let me sleep. It's feeling with more energy, more get up and go. And it's all because of what this company does.
For me as a doctor, Cardio Miracle is a staple.
Cardio Miracle to me is hope in a glass.
To try Cardio Miracle for yourself and get a special fan discount, go to the host page right now and click the link for Cardio Miracle.
And we are back. So obviously, these groups end up playing a big role in the disruption. You mentioned the federal government employees that were hell-bent to, quote-unquote, protect the results, not get a free and fair election, not get the real ones, not audit the election, protect the results, everybody. Obviously, by now, with January 6th and even more information coming out about the feds on the ground, you know that you have those people that are currently working for the government there. But then you get into all sorts of shadow realms of whether or not they're an operative or an informant or an associate, or maybe they work for one of their subcontractors that is, you know, a completely separate organization that does intelligence and isn't labeled as CIA, FBI, Homeland Security, etc. What did you find when it came to that? Because it does gray the area. And then when you're talking about the protests in D.C., how are they operational?
Okay, so it's important to know that these protests that we saw in D.C. were not necessarily, nothing really organic about it, okay? Lisa Fithian, who's a well-known leftist protest trainer, hosted a training session in October of 2020 with the various members and leaders and facilitators of these leftist affinity groups, as well as members of our own government were present on these Zoom calls, okay? A whole plethora of power brokers in the Democrat apparatus. And what were they discussing and what was she training? She was training them on taking over government buildings. You heard that right. She had an ArcGIS map, which showed that the Capitol was the main target. They had a list of potential other targets as well, including the DNC and RNC headquarters. Their agenda was to force Trump out of office by any means. They talked about contingency plans and simulations because they had ran simulation exercises leading up to that. And what they discussed was that if there seemed to be maybe a narrow Biden victory and Trump was contesting, that they were going to turn their aim on the Republicans and try to force Trump out And if it looked like there was a narrow Trump victory and Biden was conceding, they were going to turn their aims on the Democrats to force Biden to not concede, to force Trump out. But the main thing here is they had mapped out in a document called The Count that was written by Becky Bond, Zach Malitz, and Brandon Evans, who are all Democrats, political strategists, and campaign directors. And this document detailed a contingency plan to stage protests inside the Capitol on January 6th to make it physically impossible for Congress to meet and vote on the Electoral College vote count if it looked like there was going to be a constitutional crisis and that there was a potential that Trump could win the election. So they had a full-on contingency plan for January 6th to take over the Capitol building to shut it down. Why? Well, it's very interesting because this is the confusing part. There was like this red herring out there that everyone thought that Trump had to have a valid alternate slate of electors when that was never the case. All that had to happen, and the Democrats knew this and mapped it out, was that Joe Biden just had to fail to get the 270 electoral votes. And it was looking like Republicans were gearing up to do that. In fact, when Pence first opened up the ceremony, what you saw happen was you saw the first two states contesting the slates of electors, and that initially kicked it off to where he then made the next phase happen in the procedure where it breaks off into the separate House and Senate chamber hearings, where again, they're going to try to vote again to try to see if Biden can get the 270. It's very likely that we would have had the same outcome even with them being separated, because you had so many Republicans agreeing that they wanted to hear the election evidence that Rudy Giuliani and others had prepared with all of their witnesses, all of their evidence, okay? So unfortunately, before that part could actually play out, that's when you had this op go down, the taking over of the Capitol, people breached, and they shut the cameras down. What we would have seen happen, what the Democrats knew was likely to have happened, was we would have actually, the whole of America would have been watching and hearing the witness testimony put forth by Rudy Giuliani and many others, with all these witnesses showing the election fraud, the election thievery, and we would have seen Republicans refusing to accept Biden's slates of electors again, and then we would have seen it break off into a third session where it would have been one vote per state based on the legislation of each state, okay? And what would happen is they knew that Trump had the state delegations by, I believe it was 26 to 24, something like close like that, or 27 to 23. So they had already known that the states were mapped out in such a way that if it ever went to that, Trump would be the next president. Trump would have been president of the United States in 2020. So that's why they had a contingency plan to physically shut down and disrupt the electoral vote count, because they could not allow that to happen. They even had a contingency that, worst case, if they had to sustain the shutdown, they would try to force Nancy Pelosi in as president as per the rules. If essentially nobody gets put in, it would go to the Speaker of the House. So the whole point here, Jason, was they had to run an op in order to frame Trump for an insurrection, in order to justify the illegality that they had planned months in advance of sedition and insurrection against the sitting president of the United States. I have these people on Zoom calls committing crimes against our country, members of our own government pre-planning and plotting against our president, talking about conducting internal leaks and sabotage and gumming up bureaucratic processes. It's no wonder that Nancy Pelosi and the other Democrats that have infiltrated into our various law enforcement agencies at DHS, at FBI, and at Secret Service, although the fact that they knew that these leftist groups were planning to come and protest on January 6th, according to the Capitol Police's own reports, they still decided to not allow the National Guard to protect the Capitol, even though Donald Trump had requested the National Guard to be there. The Capitol Police Chief Sund, he requested the National Guard, and the National Guard themselves wanted to be there. But it was the Democrats, Nancy Pelosi And those various law enforcement agencies that falsely testified that there was no threat, despite the fact that I myself sent these people, that these leftist groups, I sent them the material and evidence that the leftist groups were planning to take over government buildings during this political election timeline. So they have no excuse for what they did. They intentionally left the Capitol vulnerable so that they could run this psyop to frame Donald Trump in order to force him out of office. And then you see these same political leftist groups go on a witch hunt, a political persecution campaign against Donald Trump and against the J6ers and against all the people surrounding Trump in order to really try to force this narrative of an insurrection. This is all to cover up for their own criminality. Even Fani Willis, for example. Fani Willis and her father are connected into these groups that were part of the Count the Vote coalition. That's right. Not only was there a Protect the Results coalition, they also had a Count the Vote coalition where they were funneling their leftists into poll worker positions, as well as their union members into poll worker positions to make sure that they were the ones counting the ballots and doing any recounts of the ballots. They had to make sure they were controlling every aspect of our election cycle in the election in 2020. That's what went down. They did it via the mail-in ballots. I'm not necessarily saying that I can rule out and conclude that there was nothing to do with the machines, but all I can say here, Jason, is what I've seen in their own documents, their own simulation exercises, their own pre-planning. Everything really revolved around the mail-in ballots. And it almost makes you wonder, is that why they had to have this pandemic with the COVID-19? Because that's what they used to justify having leniency and all of these mail-in ballot drop boxes, the leniency to just ignore election laws. That was all very crucial for them being able to pull off the steal that they did in 2020.
So I want to talk about that aspect in a second, but you discussed really the security level there. And I want to focus on that for a moment. Again, it was night and day from the Stop the Steal rallies from the moment I got to the Ellipse early in the morning. I was like, where's the security? There was literally, for people that were not there, in order to get into the arena where Trump and Giuliani were all speaking, you couldn't bring anything with you. And it was almost just like a short concert line, and they were allowing everybody just to discard their backpacks. There were thousands of backpacks everywhere. The day after, actually less than 24 hours after, somebody had gone through D.C. and planted pipe bombs everywhere. I'm sure that would be total safety protocol, and you can't tell me again that some law enforcement didn't know. That's a whole nother thing. That seems like a plan B. One of the other things that you kind of glossed over is the fact that Giuliani was never able to present his evidence. And unfortunately, that was really, that was not the exception. It was the rule that if you had any of this evidence, they just said you didn't have standing. Whether or not it was a national case with the Supreme Court that failed us in that regard, or the cases in Arizona, etc. Now, 4 years later, some of these things are coming to light. Look, Sidney Powell's not perfect, but she didn't deserve to have her license taken away. That was just overturned. When we come back, I want to talk about the likelihood that we will get an honest audit and how we deal with a system, again, a Supreme Court that continues to fail us, in my opinion. We could talk about all this election stuff, but something that goes hand in hand with it is government and big tech collusion. The Missouri versus Biden case, you have the state Supreme Court get it right. They're like, hey, this is clearly collusion. This is terrible. Our Supreme Court steps in, says, hold off on that ruling. We're going to take a look at it. And I thought, because I'm dumb, that because the state Supreme Court looked at it, our Supreme Court would at least have to look at it. Nope. No standing again. I want to talk about no standing and much more. We got Millie Weaver. We'll be back with more Making Sense of the Madness after this.
My name is General Mike Flynn, and I want everyone to know that I stand fully behind Beverly Hills Precious Metals and its owner, Andrew Sorcini. We are facing one of the greatest periods of financial uncertainty in both American and world history. And so now is the time to organize your finances. With the advent of the BRICS pay system, we need to now seriously consider how we can take better care of ourselves and our families and start some serious decision making when it comes to our wealth. You can also ask about their newest 2-ounce coin of yours truly. It's an absolutely great gift, and I'm deeply honored to be part of history, as well as helping people protect their finances, their wealth, and their investments. So visit gold.generalflynn.com. Tell them the General sent you. Thank you so very much. God bless you, and God bless America.
The Donor Deck represents a groundbreaking independent crowdfunding initiative driven by patriots like you to bring back our esteemed President Donald J. Trump to office. With unwavering passion, we pledge all profits from the sale to MAGA Inc. and Fight Like a Flynn PAC. The exquisitely detailed challenge coin is a timeless collectible to be passed down to generations. It symbolizes your continuous dedication to assisting President Trump in his quest to rejuvenate America to its former greatness. Get your Donor Deck now. Go to the Patriot.tv store and click on Donor Deck. Enjoy the magnificent artwork and scripture on each playing card, knowing our appreciation for your continuous dedication to assisting President Trump in his quest to rejuvenate America to its former greatness. You'll get this keepsake collectible challenge coin acknowledging your support for Donald Trump's run back to the White House, and the Donor Deck of 52 exquisite playing cards, plus a beautiful display case to show your challenge coin. Go to the Patriot.tv store and get your Donor Deck now.
And we are back. So, Millie, I kind of ended on a tirade there. There are a lot of people that believe that this Trump 2.0 administration is going to be much different than the first. I really hope so. I think some of the appointments are definitely there. But how do you deal with a system that it seems at every point where there's a critical issue, they either punt or do the wrong thing, right? I mean, I know a lot of people want to argue about the abortion stuff because they're conservatives. I'm not a conservative. I'm a constitutionalist at best. I've hated the system for decades. I'm politically homeless. I want accountability for corruption. And we can't have accountability on elections if we can't audit them. And then we can't hold the officials that rigged it accountable. That's a big problem. We can't clean up big tech if we can't hold them accountable. And time again, when we get to that level of the Supreme Court, they do us no favors. They've done us no favors in 2020, and I would argue this time around in 2024, with that Biden Missouri case, they cut our throats once again. So I'd love to get your take on those rulings,
Sure.
And then how we change that.
Well, what I could add to this part of the discussion is essentially that the role that big tech plays in elections is that the data analytics, data collection and harvesting plays a very, very important role in elections and really in their ability to actually steal elections. What you see is that the Democrat Party relies heavily on data collection, harvesting, and works with some very prominent big tech companies. And what they'll do is they'll match up the polling data with the voter registration data with all of your anything they can get off of the internet or even off of your social media, as well as your actual phones that you have yourself. So your phones are using location services. They track you so they can see where you're at, where you are. They can hear you. Your devices actually are listening to you and transcribing what you're talking about in the privacy of your own home or to your friends or people around you. They literally have people who are called digital ethnographers, and their job is literally like something out of National Geographic to study human behavior and how humans interact when they think that they are in the privacy of their homes, right? So they actually study us like we're something out of National Geographic. The data collection, they build up actual avatars of you and I, and then they map it out into actual AI simulations that they run. If you noticed after this recent election, when by the grace of God, Trump won, there was a lot that went down to really make that happen. But in AOC was complaining, we ran over 80,000 simulations. How did this happen, right? Well, that's why I say it's a miracle from God. But essentially they rely heavily on AI and simulations, and they need data to make their simulations more accurate. And so they collect data from everyone, and they can predict who you're going to vote for literally months or even years in advance, as well as they know who you're voting for on the day of election as well. They know whether you showed up to vote or not, because they can see that your phone pinged near that polling location or voting location. So this all makes it so much easier for them to be able to engineer and try to rig our elections. So yeah, data plays a huge role, and the Democrats rely heavily on it. But the problem is so do the Republicans. I've had these conversations with many prominent Republicans as well, and they're so afraid to let go of that tool. They don't want to let go of that tool, because my thing is, I'm like, and I've been advocating, because I helped found a tech company called QUX. But I've been advocating we need to get onto electronics devices that don't track us, spy on us, invade our Fourth Amendment right to privacy, because all of that is actually used to the betterment of the powers that be that want to track us and want to be able to control the outcome and how the public will respond. I mean, they literally can put it into predictive analyzing tools, Jason, where they can respond how the public will respond to a particular event, like a pandemic, or like January 6th, or like a stolen election. They can predict it out, model it out, and then they can identify, oh, you know what, that guy Jason, he's going to be a problem because we've predicted that he's going to come up and be a voice to stand against us. So let's send real operators out into the field ahead of time to try to trip him up, get him caught up, and knock him off of that trajectory, off of our timeline that we have him on. That's how sophisticated it is. So yeah, we need to be more mindful about how technology plays a role in our elections, but also on how the deep state's able to try to control the American public.
And just to kind of add to the kind of profiles they're running on people, I don't think people get how deep it is. It's not just what you like, what you post, how many times you take a selfie, which one did you use? How long did you scroll on one person's thing? How much time are you spending on their page? What subject matter? It gets down to minutia. And yes, they are using audio recognition software. They say that they're not taping you. They use a different algorithm. It's called ACR, audio content recognition. They do the same thing with video on your phones and every other device. It's not just your phone. It's your smart TV. It's your video game system. It's much smaller devices. It's devices that are hooked in to your local Walmart, shopping center, you name it. It's very Minority Report, and we're already there. And I guess this would be just a deeper conversation, but right now with artificial intelligence and language models, you can see in real time, if you're working with these things, how quickly they are able to not only obtain this information, but make it operational. And the really scary thing is this is really all government regulated even at this point. I know that Mark Ander, I forget how you pronounce his last name, but he just talked about that, how AI is really proprietary and it's our military industrial complex. And anyone that gets outside of that's not going to be allowed to operate if these people have their way. Extremely concerning on what we've seen with social media, et cetera. And, just to kind of reiterate what you said about the mail-in ballots in this election, I've hated the machines forever. I've wanted them out since they were Diebold machines, since we were talking about them in 2004. Total poison. But obviously, when you're shy about 10 million votes this time around, from the last time. The 81 million vote guy, what did Trump get this time around? Just shy of 72 million, won the popular vote. Where'd all those votes go? Now, you might have been able to convince me that because of the pandemic and people voting mail-in, you would have got 1, maybe 2 million excess votes. 10 million? That's imagination land.
Yeah, it doesn't match up. The numbers were so off. And so the real question is, why were they so gun shy this election? That's the real question. Oh, could it have been that this time around, the Republican Party, Trump's campaign, many journalists and others, we mapped out and knew exactly what they did in 2020, and we were ready to catch them red-handed for 2024. So if you remember James O'Keefe, he had people inserted into poll worker positions, ready to catch them. We know Laura Trump did as well. She was putting out warnings. We know that we had the Republican Party suing over the fact that they tried to gatekeep Republicans and conservatives from becoming poll workers to begin with. In some of the swing states, almost 80% of their applications were rejected. So I know, because I was looking inside and I was still monitoring some of these leftist groups that were active in the 2020 election still, and I was watching them, and they were panicking about how MAGA QAnoners, that's what they're saying, were infiltrating the election process, meaning they're just participating, right? Whereas before, our side just didn't show up. We didn't participate. We didn't think we had to participate in our election process. And really, it used to be mostly being done primarily by like the elderly community who just did it for their patriotic duty to some degree. But then you also had the unions involved. But we know the unions are heavily Democrat leaning. But what really stood out in 2020 during the pandemic is they told all the old people who typically would go and do the elections, don't risk your health, stay home. We got it covered. And then they had they funneled their leftist protesters, their anti-Trump activists, their union groups that hate Trump. They funneled them all into the election worker positions. And that's what really put them in that position to be able to pull off 2020 versus 2024. They had way too many eyes on it. We were ready to catch them in the act. And I think they realized, okay, this time around, you're going to prison. If you try it, you're going to prison. There's too many eyes on it, too many people watching it. So I believe that what happened was they ended up chickening out, or to a certain degree, they failed in some of their attempts to be able to steal the election. Not to say that they didn't have some attempts, but I think that there was the combination of the massive wave for Trump, as well as there was too many eyeballs on it this time and too many sting operations that were going on in the background.
Well, I mean, again, he gets the popular vote. He only loses in places where you don't have voter ID. And I would also argue, I look at somebody like Carrie Lake. It's very hard for me to believe that she actually lost twice. So, you also have to look at the down ballot stuff and some of the smaller elections, et cetera. Like I said,
and notice the key, though, that's Arizona. So if you notice, the states that were taking forever to vote were the states where they had Democrat Secretary of States or Democrat governors.
Yeah. Exactly. Listen, same day voting. We can get it done. The caveman could count on the wall. We can do addition. We don't need the machines. We could use technology to empower instead of enslave the rest of us. We're about to take our final break. Before we do, I want to talk about January 6th just really slightly and where that's going to go. Because, look, Trump's talked about on day one that he's going to start looking at some of these people that have been convicted and either pardon them or commute their sentences. And, I was there. I didn't go inside, but I was up on the second level. I never got a call or a meeting, but I also put all my footage out immediately. I would have streamed it, but as most people know, the jammers or something was out, and as you got too close to the Capitol, it was almost impossible to stream. Now, look, if you were violent, if you destroyed property, charge them with that. If you trespassed, okay, pay your ticket. These people were supposed to get, speedy trials. Some people haven't even been arrested yet. They say they're going to arrest more. Other people, you can hate Enrique Tarrio's politics and not like his face. He's doing 2 decades for not being there. Like, he wasn't even there. He wasn't in the state. I want to get your...
All the J6ers need to be released. Mm-hmm. All the J6ers need to be pardoned because it's entrapment. So here's the analogy I'll give you, which this is really what happened here. You have the government targeting American citizens with psychological warfare weapons tools that are used and engineered on social media. Okay, they use the psychological software systems on social media to nudge and to create a psyop on the American people that goes along with their simulation exercises that these leftist groups were doing with government officials and employees, with feds, okay? And they knew, so look, they knew that they were going to steal the election. They knew that Trump was going to contest it. And they knew that there was going to be a response from his base and his supporters. They engineered all of that, and they literally walked people and entrapped them to January 6th. You had feds surrounding that entire operation. It's all come out in congressional hearings. Okay, it's come out. They had so many feds around there, as well as intelligence agents nudging and pushing and molding people into that direction. They intentionally left the gates down. Not only that, but the thousands of agent provocateurs who are wearing all black, like Black Bloc, who've never been fully identified, when we have these leftists pre-planning to do exactly what happened on January 6th. There needs to be a proper investigation into January 6th. I'm suspicious that Congress is covering up a proper investigation because they don't want people to realize that they certified a fraudulent election, because that's where they messed up. They certified a stolen, fraudulent election because they allowed a PSYOP to make them fearful, okay, into doing it. So I think that all those people should be essentially pardoned, because if the government's going to go to that extent to PSYOP somebody into committing a crime, whether or not they committed the crime or not, it's entrapment. And the government should essentially be penalized for trying to entrap American citizens. It's not right. And we need to get to the bottom of the leftist groups that pre-planned it months in advance, that were working with federal government bureaucrats and government officials in order to run a coup on President Trump. That's the real investigation that needs to happen. But I bet you anything, Jason, none of these Republicans in Congress are going to touch it. They aren't going to touch it. Why? Who has them in a vice? That's what I want to know. Who has our Republicans in a vice? Because I've tried to get this material to so many of them, and it's always, wow, this is so criminal. Wow, this is so crazy. Wow, oh my gosh, I can't believe they're saying this on camera. And then it's crickets.
Well, that's the problem, right? You know, and I brought this up with Giuliani when he was on the show, because he read that book about the Biden crime family and, you know, how to prosecute them. I'm like, no one's getting prosecuted, Rudy. And I hate to say that to people. I'm just like, there isn't a precedent for it. You know, look at the January 5th pipe bomber. I mean, are we even going to get the truth of that with the Trump administration? That's the real question, because we haven't had accountability on what I would call the executive within the executive since Iran-Contra. Even with that, it was a lot of slaps on the wrist. It was a lot of show. They made Oliver North the face of it. He wasn't really the guy behind all of it. What did he get? Book deals, TV shows, became a millionaire. That's not how you discourage that type of behavior. And the only real executive that I can say outside of, like, you know, them going after Trump's Manafort, et cetera, that was somewhat legitimate over the last 3 decades is Scooter Libby. And he was taking the fall for the Enron guys, and Trump pardoned him. So we got a broken system.
Yeah.
We got to take that final break. When we come back, I want to talk to you about the likelihood that we will get some kind of criminal prosecutions. Obviously, we've had a dementia patient in there since day one. Not a great thing, only that he pardoned his son. We all knew he was going to do that, but gave a preemptive pardon for 2014 on. If he does that with other people without crimes they've been charged for, it changes the game forever, in my opinion, in an extremely negative way. I mean, he might as well have chosen his son's birthday. It was almost like, really just pissing on all of us by naming the date for the Burisma corruption. I'm going to get Millie's take on that and much more. Final segment of the show after this.
Hi, fellow patriots. How are you today? No, really, how are you? If you're looking for a way to energize, depuff, revitalize your skin, and maybe soothe some sore muscles, look no further than the Patriot TV store and the Nu Skin Renew Spa IO system. This is not your basic body massaging system. Nuh-uh. This has adaptive microcurrent technology that goes through these wonderful nodes on the bottom to really get in there. When you use it, you feel it just gently tickling in there and massaging everything. It's marvelous. And not only do you get the device, you also get a free tube of the special conductive gel to go with it. So there you are. You can depuff, you can revitalize, energize, and not only that, contour, firm, and tone. And we all want that. So go to the Patriot TV store now and get yours today from Nu Skin, the Renew Spa IO system. Attention business owners, are you ready to advertise to millions of loyal patriots ready to buy your products or services? Here is your golden chance to advertise with Jason Bermas and connect with his massive audience on Patriot TV and his incredibly loyal social media followers. As an advertiser on Making Sense of the Madness, you also reach his followers on the top social media sites. As Jason dives into complex current events and conspiracies, offering investigative analysis and thought-provoking discussions to uncover the deeper truths behind the headlines. When you advertise with Jason on Making Sense of the Madness, you're aligning your brand with integrity, loyalty, and a dedication to truth. Jason's audience is passionate, conservative, and committed to the values your business stands for. When given the choice, Jason's followers will buy your products or services over other woke companies. Don't miss this opportunity to elevate your brand with the power of Patriot TV. Reach out to us today at advertise@patriot.tv.
And we are back. And by the way, I don't know if you're watching the mainstream media, but now there are these they all knew that Joe had dementia from day one. Really? Are you kidding? Did anyone watch the debates when he couldn't name a website and he was saying 300 Joe and talking about babies and record players? Like it's not even a story, but here we are. He's already given out some scary pardons. They're talking about preemptive pardons. We only got about 6 or 7 minutes left in the broadcast. Will we see real accountability? What does that look like? And can you see real accountability if people are preemptively pardoned for crimes they haven't even been named to commit yet?
It's like a confession, right?
Yeah.
They're just like, get it all out there ahead of time so that they can't try to figure it out and come after us. Because they know that what they've done has been incredibly corrupt. This is a corrupt cabal of people. We just don't know how far does the corruption go? How far has it seeped and saturated throughout our government? So I'm not so sure. I do feel hopeful, right? I feel hopeful that Kash Patel will come in there. I feel hopeful that Trump will make some decent appointments and actually get some people into our government that's going to be able to properly open up some investigations to find out the truth about January 6th. The one thing is I really hope they don't just try to bury it all, sweep it under the rug. Okay, we're all just going to forget about that. And we're going to forget about the fact that the Democrats ran a coup on President Trump in 2020 and stole an election. I don't want that to happen, because if we don't actually address the fact that you have a network of thousands of federal government bureaucrats that are criminals, Marxists in nature, okay? These guys are literally Marxists, and they're inside our government institutions. If we don't actually go and investigate these people and get them out of our government, we're not going to ever fully fix the problem. Yes, we can elect Trump. Yes, we can elect these congressional officials. But if we still have the bureaucracy saturated with Marxists and corrupt criminals, we haven't drained the swamp, have we? Now, I know Trump is appointing Elon Musk, and Elon's heading up Doge, and they're going to try to do some things in that way. But without the material I have and actually looking at it under a lens and further investigating it out and actually criminally, subpoenaing some of these people, getting them under interrogatories and depositions, I don't see how you can properly trace out the network to actually fully drain the swamp, because a lot of these people, they've got people embedding. When they were in their Zoom calls, Jason, they would say, oh, I've been embedded for 8 months now in this governmental agency. That's how bad it is. You have new people being embedded and infiltrating in. And with Joe Biden's executive order he did, the American Climate Corps, he created a pathway for more of these radical leftist foot soldiers to be embedded and slotted into our bureaucratic institutions and military institutions. So we need proper investigations. I cannot stress that enough to you.
Do you think we're going to get any prosecutions? And, I'm not one of these people that's in la la land. Joe Biden, Hillary Clinton, they're not going to jail. You know what I mean? That level of person, I don't think you'll see it. Obviously, we still have the battle with Trump and Merchan and whether or not there's going to be a sentencing for that New York trial. I'm hoping that we just, number one, we get the classified documents we've been promised. That would go a long way in, for me at least, showing the rest of the country and the world how corrupt it's been and saying, hey, this wasn't us. We want to fix it. But that does mean JFK, RFK, MLK, John Lennon, let's go down the line, MK Ultra, 9/11. I mean, for those that don't know, when we're talking about Operation Paperclip, the program to bring Nazis into the United States, as of 2013, when Annie Jacobson wrote that book, they still had 500 million documents classified on a post-World War II program. If we don't have transparency for the deep state or the shadow government or continuity of government for the past 7+ decades, I don't know how we rebuild a constitutional republic, Millie.
Yeah, and this is the thing. I think a lot of times when we talk about the deep state, we talk about the corrupt cabal inside of the government, it gives a false impression that these people are somehow competent or powerful, when in fact, they've put our country in such a vulnerable position, it would terrify the American people if they knew what the real problems are, how our cyber infrastructure is completely vulnerable right now to foreign attack, how our lights are being kept on by our own government paying ransomware hackers. Our country is falling apart. They have put our country in such a destitute and weak position. That is the thing that should enrage you the most. Yes, they're corrupt. Yes, they go after their political opponents. But the fact that we have a president right now who literally has dementia, doesn't even know what day it is, and we have a country on the brink of World War III because he's stoking the flames with Russia, between Ukraine and everything else, and our cybersecurity is a laughingstock. It would terrify you. We've got all these drones flying around. Our government is a hot mess right now. In so many ways, it's terrifying. Okay, it is really not a good situation that our country is in right now. We are in no position to be picking fights with Russia or China or any other world superpower. We are in no position right now. And so that's the part that enrages me the most is your corruption. Not only are you corrupt and evil and targeting innocent Americans and innocent people because of their political views, your corruption has broken the back of our nation, and we will be lucky if by the grace of God we're able to fix and heal this nation and bring us back up to a strong and secure and protected nation again. We've got all these illegals that have flooded in. We've got Tren de Aragua in American neighborhoods. This is disgusting what they've done to our country, and I just hope that Trump and the people that he's appointed have taken the duty and their oath and their obligation to the American people serious, that our country needs to be made whole again. And we're not going to be made whole if we don't actually investigate and go after these people and fix the problems that our country is essentially facing right now. It's insane.
You can follow her at Millie__Weaver on X, and you can check out everything we discussed and much more, very extensive article over at millennialmillie.com. You know the drill over here. It is not about left or right. It is always about right and wrong. I absolutely love you guys, and we will see you on the flip side.